push against to move you through the water. It may seem like there's an overwhelming array of options: blade size, materials, ridges, vents, and so on. Your PADI professional can help you select the fins best suited to your needs. Full foot fins are convenient and suitable for warm water diving where you don't need additional foot protection. But most scuba divers opt for open heel fins with wetsuit boots that insulate your feet and provide some protection when you're walking to or from the dive site. When sizing your fin, be sure the pocket comes to the point where your ankle meets your foot. If it doesn't, you need a larger size. Basic care for all dive gear calls for rinsing in fresh water after each use, especially in salt water or chlorinated water, keeping it out of direct sunlight, and storing in a cool, dry place. Although scuba's been around for more than 50 years, it was relatively recently that the equipment evolved into the integrated, streamlined unit you have today. Modern scuba consists of 3 basic components that, when assembled, function as a single unit: the BCD, scuba tank, and regulator. As you learned earlier, your BCD, buoyancy control device, permits you to adjust your buoyancy by adding or releasing air. Over the years, there have been various styles, but today by far the most common is the jacket-style BCD, which you wear like a sleeveless coat. Modern BCDs all feature a large diameter inflation-deflation hose for easily adding or releasing air, a low-pressure inflator mechanism for push-button control, and an overpressure relief valve so it won't burst if overinflated.
Okay, cool.
You want to choose one sized for you, adjustable, with ample buoyancy for you and your other equipment.
Okay.
Many divers prefer a weight-integrated BCD, which eliminates a separate weight belt. We'll go over weight systems in more detail in Section 2. To use your BCD, you need to adjust it for a proper fit. Check that it's comfortably snug but not too tight. Then fully inflate it to be sure it still doesn't feel restrictive. Your instructor will help you adjust your BCD during your confined water dives. After diving, rinse your BCD with fresh water like other gear. But you also need to rinse the inside. Fill it about 1/3 with fresh water, then the rest of the way with air. Swish the water around and then drain it completely through the deflator hose. After allowing it to dry, partially inflate it for storage. Obviously, your scuba tank holds the compressed air you breathe underwater. It's a high-pressure cylinder made of aluminum or steel, with a valve that controls airflow to and from the tank. You can identify valves as yoke valves or DIN valves. Yoke valves are the most common. The regulator attaches via a yoke assembly. With the DIN system, the regulator screws into the valve. The DIN system handles somewhat higher pressures. All regulator connections with a tank require an O-ring. Without it, there's no airtight seal. Look for the O-ring in the face of yoke valves, or on the regulator if you use the DIN system. Your tank comes pre-assembled, and you only need to have it filled at your local PADI dive center or resort with pure, dry, compressed breathing air. Note that you never fill your cylinder with pure oxygen in recreational diving. Since scuba cylinders hold high-pressure air, you want to handle them carefully. Always block, tie, or strap them so they don't roll or tumble in a car or boat. In places where your cylinder might get knocked over easily, lay it down. Besides rinsing in fresh water and rinsing after each use, you have some extra maintenance considerations with cylinders. The valve should open and close smoothly. If it doesn't, have your dive center or resort service it. Always open and close the valve gently, and don't over-tighten it. Never completely drain your cylinder. Always leave at least a few bar, couple hundred psi in it to keep moisture and contaminants from entering. Your scuba regulator allows you to breathe underwater by reducing high-pressure tank air to match the surrounding water pressure and delivering it only when you inhale. Because regulators only release air on demand, in some places divers call them demand valves. Your regulator is a simple and reliable device with only a few moving parts. The first stage attaches to the valve and reduces the cylinder air to an intermediate pressure. The second stage reduces this intermediate pressure to the surrounding pressure so you can breathe comfortably. Your regulator also has a submersible pressure gauge, SPG or contents gauge for short, that tells you how much air you have. It has an extra second stage on a longer hose called an alternate air source, which you'll learn to use for sharing air with another diver. And it has a hose with a coupling to attach to the low-pressure inflator on your BCD. If you're diving in a dry suit, there will be two such hoses, with the longer one going to your dry suit. You'll learn more about alternate air sources and dry suits in Section 2. Your dive center or resort will attach the SPG and other accessories you choose. So aside from assembling your scuba unit, there's nothing you need to do with your regulator prior to diving. After each use, rinse your regulator thoroughly with fresh water. Put the first stage dust cover in place to keep water from entering the first stage. Rinse gently and don't press the purge button, which can allow water to flow up the hose into the first stage. Finally, your regulator needs annual servicing by a qualified professional to keep it properly lubricated and adjusted and to replace worn parts. Take care of it, and it will take care of you. Your SPG tells you how much air you have during a dive so you can avoid running out. Obviously, it's mandatory equipment. SPGs range from simple gauges to electronic gauges that combine with other instruments in a dive computer. We'll cover computers in more detail in the next section. Some SPGs have no hose, but use a transmitter on the first stage to send air supply information to a computer on your wrist. One of the principles of safe recreational diving is that you don't dive alone. Even during your confined water dives, you'll practice diving with a buddy. Buddies lend each other a hand, and they enhance each other's safety by helping check each other's gear before a dive. By reminding each other of air, depth, and time limits underwater. And by being ready to assist in the unlikely event of an emergency.
It's just the way it integrated.
So the buddy system is important for practicality, safety, and fun. You and your buddy have a responsibility to each other. For the system to work, you have to take it seriously. But that doesn't mean you can't have fun at the same time.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Make a habit of staying close to your buddy at all times. Okay, now let's look at the scuba skills you learn and practice in your first dive in a pool or confined water.
Actual tank. So kind of check, make sure you got the right position there, and then go ahead and cinch up your BCDs.
Start assembling your gear by putting your BCD on your tank. The BCD tank band stretches when wet, so the first step is to wet it. Slide the BCD down on the cylinder so the valve opening faces where your head will be. Set it so the top of the jacket's hard plate, if it has one, is about even with the tank valve base. Next, tighten the cam band as much as you can by hand, then swing it over to lock it down. As a check, lift the unit by the BCD and shake it gently. The regulator goes on next. Check to be sure there's an O-ring in the valve, or on the regulator first stage if you're using a DIN system regulator. Orient the primary second stage to go over your right shoulder. Then remove the dust cap and put the first stage in place. Tighten the yoke only finger tight. Or for the DIN system, gently screw the regulator into the valve until it's snug. Now attach the low-pressure inflator hose to the BCD low-pressure inflator. Face the SPG away from you and open the valve slowly and gently all the way. If you hear a small leak, the valve O-ring may be dirty or worn out, so let your instructor know. Assuming no leaks, check your submersible pressure gauge to see that you have enough air for the dive. Press the purge button momentarily. Air should flow freely and stop when you release it. Exhale into the mouthpiece to check the exhaust valves. Then, take a few breaths. Your regulator should breathe smoothly and easily. Last, secure all hoses with clips, snaps, and other attachments. Dangling SPGs, alternate air sources, and other equipment damage and kill underwater life when they drag across the bottom or reef. And this damages your gear and creates drag when you swim. Nothing dangles or protrudes from the proficient, environmentally sensitive diver. With your scuba unit assembled, it's time to gear up. Have your mask, fins, and snorkel adjusted before the dive to save time. If you'll be using a wetsuit, that goes on first. With most jacket BCDs, you put your weight belt on next. What's important is that nothing traps your weight belt. You need to be able to remove it quickly with one hand in an emergency. Wear it with the standard right hand release. If you're using a weight-integrated BCD, you probably won't use a weight belt at all. To get into your scuba unit, make sure the shoulder straps are connected. Then slip into it like a coat while someone holds it for you. Fasten and adjust the waist and shoulder straps so they're snug but not overly tight.
Shoulders.
When everything feels right, tilt your head back. If it hits the tank valve, your tank's probably too high.
Good to go?
Condensation will fog your mask unless you use commercial defog, or in a pinch, saliva. Rub defog on the inside of the mask, then rinse it once briefly. You should be fog-free for the whole dive, unless you flood your mask. To put on your mask without getting hair trapped under it, put it against your face, then pull the strap back.
Check those straps.
Put your fins on in the water, or as close to it as possible. Avoid walking in fins. If you must, walk backward to avoid tripping. When you're almost ready to go, check your gear and your buddies for proper fit and function. In the next confined water dive, you'll learn a 5-step pre-dive safety check for this.
Good.
The final step before entering deep water is to partially inflate your BCD. Press the low-pressure inflator button in short bursts until you've inflated it enough so you float comfortably. That's usually around half full. To deflate your BCD so you can go underwater, you want to be vertical, relatively head up, in the water. Hold up the BCD hose and press the exhaust valve button. Many BCDs have quick dump exhaust valves too, which you use by pulling the BCD hose or a lanyard.
ready to take your first breath?
All right.
Ready to breathe underwater for the first time? Great. But just a second, your instructor needs to give you a few hand signals so you can communicate down there.
Ready to give it a try?
You bet.
Slow her down. Put the rig in your mouth. Exhale into it first. Just take deep, slow breaths.
All right.
Let's go. All right.
Okay, now. You'll never forget the first time you breathe underwater, and you may not want to trust your regulator at first, but take a few breaths. Hey, it works. As you get used to breathing underwater, remember to breathe continuously and not hold your breath. Watch for your instructor's signals, but relax and enjoy the experience. After you're comfortable breathing underwater, your instructor will have you remove the regulator from your mouth and replace it. You learn to do this because there are skills you'll practice that involve taking out the mouthpiece, and it can happen by accident. No big deal. Out of your mouth, the second stage fills with water that you need to clear before you can breathe again. The easiest way to do this is in a more or less upright position. Exhale sharply into the mouthpiece. This blows the water out of the one-way valves so you can get air. But what if you don't have enough air in your lungs? No worries. Block the mouthpiece with your tongue, and then again in a more or less upright position. Press the purge button. Air from your tank blows the water out, and now you can breathe. Since the rule is you never hold your breath while scuba diving, when the regulator's not in your mouth, exhale a continuous stream of bubbles by making an ah sound. This keeps your airway open to avoid serious, possibly fatal, lung overexpansion injuries. When you let go of the second stage, or if it gets bumped from your mouth, it tends to swing behind your back. There are two ways to find it easily. For the first, get in an upright position, then lean a bit to your right. Run your arms straight back alongside your tank and then sweep forward. The regulator hose will end up against your elbow. This method is easiest and works most of the time, but once in a while your second stage may hang up on something. Reach behind your head with your right hand and find where the hose attaches to the first stage. It may help you reach the first stage if you lift the tank up and to the right with your left hand. Follow the hose until you find the second stage. By this point, you'll probably notice that water tends to seep into your mask. You don't want to have to go to the surface every time this happens, so to blow it out, hold the top of your mask firmly against your face, blow through your nose, and tilt your head back. The air forces the water out of the bottom of the mask. Some masks have a purge valve for clearing water. If yours does, hold your mask firmly and look down while blowing through your nose.